The Creative Process Podcast with Peter Bogdanovich and Catherine Mistel.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Creative Process Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Papagiorgio, and with my beautiful wife, my co-host,
Catherine Natali. And of course, we have our number one fan, Chanel Bella. Say hello to Chanel Bella.
Chanel.
She's
say
back.
Hi to the world.
She's back.
Why she was gone?
Well, she decided to leave one of our interviews, because she had something better to do. But
Yeah, it's called napping. Anyway, Catherine, do you want to introduce our first, our guest today? Not our first guest.
it's not our first guest.
Yeah.
No, this is our third guest.
Yeah, no.
James Kelly,
Thank you.
Now, tell the audience.
novelist,
Yeah.
scriptwriter, playwright, radio host, owner of Quirky Media.
Quirky Minds Media.
Quirky Minds Media. Sorry about that,
also,
James.
And also, he's the owner of all aspects
Radio Network.
Radio Network.
which what the show is on.
Yes.
Which the show is on.
Yes.
So we want to talk about your creative process, James.
Well, first, James, tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Let's see. What do you want me to tell? Past, family,
past.
friends.
Past.
if you can.
But, okay.
Way past. way past.
Okay. But tell the audience, where you were born. And,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I was born in Missouri, but grew up in Oklahoma, and I actually shared Oklahoma, Missouri every year. 3 months in Missouri, 9 months in Oklahoma. Every
Why
year.
is that?
I would always go stay with my grandparents 3 months out of the year, which was my
okay.
choice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I did that from age 6.
Did you want to get away from your parents?
Yes, from age 6 until I was 17, until I went off to college.
Wow.
Wow.
So yeah, and that was every year, and loved it. I loved that whole transition type thing, going from one home setting to another.
Now, was your parents creative in any way, or?
Well, my mother was a single parent most of the time, in between marriages.
Right.
And then so it was just a nice getaway because I had 3 brothers, so it was just a wonderful escape to my own world with my grandparents.
Were they creative too, your brothers, or?
No,
No. So you're the odd out.
not at all. Well, I shouldn't say that. When it comes to construction or building things,
Yeah.
that they were very creative.
So
Well,
they're
that is
mechanically
creative. I mean,
yeah,
that's creative.
Yeah,
That
that's
is
true.
creative.
That's true. And my grandfather was really creative.
There's not a whole lot of people that are technical and creative at the same time. Usually
Yeah.
the one or the other.
Right. I always think of, and I know what the show's about, I always think of as creative like writing or acting, but you're right.
Yeah.
Creative can be any process.
I mean, I have a friend of mine. He's I grew up with. He worked on our house, Anthony, and he's a tile setter, and I mean the guy is super creative. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like he's, Catherine kind of drew. This is what I want, and he created it.
And
Yeah.
he would just, start drawing it
Yeah.
and say, this is what you want. And then technically he was able to measure exactly what the cut was of that tile.
Mm.
And make
That
this
is a
beautiful,
talent.
beautiful design and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my grandfather started out as a cabinet maker
Okay.
and
Okay.
turned that into a construction company.
That's creative.
And, and that's when of course, by the time I was of age to work with him, it was a full-fledged construction company. But he literally started out as a cabinet maker. And back then, that's when they did all the scroll work and all that kind of stuff. So he was very creative in that way. And I remember every year for Christmas, he would make, my grandmother made quilts.
That's
or
creative.
blankets or whatever she needed,
Sure,
you know. And my grandfather always made, like, for the grandkids, they had 28 grandchildren, between the great-grandchildren. Anyway, they would make like baby rockers or rocking horses.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah,
And then
that's great.
for like his daughters and daughter-in-laws,
custom made.
all custom made.
Yeah.
He would make like bookshelves or armoires. I mean, everything was made in his workshop.
Do you still have his pieces, or?
No.
Oh,
I'm sure some of my family members
Somebody.
do, but I don't.
Yeah.
you know.
yeah.
But my grandmother was an unbelievable quilt maker. Unbelievable. So in that creative process, she did everything, canning, making jellies, you name it. So I get what you're saying. This is creative process can be a many, many different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely.
So I had 3 brothers, and then I'm the one who ventured out. I'm the one who left home, went to college.
You left the nest.
I left the nest, went to college, was restless, ended up in Florida, ended up in Las Vegas, then Atlanta, Georgia, and now here I'm back in Las Vegas.
So Las Vegas called you back.
called me back.
Yes, it did.
Yes.
Hey, James, when you coming back?
Yeah.
So Las Vegas has a certain energy, obviously, that Oklahoma doesn't have, or Missouri.
Definitely has a different energy than Oklahoma.
That's true, yeah.
Yes,
That's true.
Yes.
It's with all the entertainment and
I think we drove through Oklahoma when we drove.
yes, we did.
Which part? Because it's very flat.
We
Yes.
took I-40 across.
Okay, if you took I-40 across, you might have come across some of the hilly area.
Yeah.
And then it started getting flat
Because
again.
we drove from New York, and it was January.
Yeah.
So I wanted to miss all the snow. So
Mhm.
that's why we took
Yeah.
40.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of cornfields, I remember.
That's mainly Kansas.
And
And,
that-
Brown.
yeah.
Remember, it was all brown.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's where I grew up. Brown, flat. stuff. Now, actually, I lived in Bartlesville, which is the northeastern section of Oklahoma, and it starts getting really green and hilly in there.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's
it's a
good.
different landscape
That's
completely
good.
than the rest of the state. So it's kind of beautiful.
So
though.
tell us about your plays and your books.
All right.
And
I actually started
James, where's
writing.
your books?
Oh, I don't know. We'll show them later.
Okay.
You can put them in.
I'll put them in. I'll
In the
put
creative
We'll put 'em in.
process when you're
I
editing.
will put them in post-production.
There you go. Okay. I actually wrote my first screenplay when I was 22.
5 years ago. Okay.
Yeah. And so anyway, but I had no idea what I had written. I actually wrote this. I was out of work for 3 months. I was with another friend. We were living together. And she actually had the soap operas on. This was when we had only three channels, remember? Remember that?
yeah,
Yeah. Channel
And
2.
so,
channel,
yeah.
Channel
7.
2, Channel 4, and Channel 7.
So we were watching the soaps because that's what she wanted to watch. And I thought, this is boring. And within 3 days, I was hooked on the soaps. And I was so mad at myself.
Which ones?
General Hospital, One Life to Live. And I thought, Luke and Laura, remember Luke and Laura?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought,
You know when I was really young, I used to watch Dark Shadows.
oh, I love Dark
Yeah,
Shadows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was creeped out by that as a kid.
Yeah, I love Dark Shadows. But I thought, I can write as well as... I said, we can write as well as this. And so we started writing this script called A Snow in Las Vegas about the Mexican drug cartel and how they were sneaking in cocaine from Mexico and distributing it. And I had someone I worked with whose name was Minnie Cudner, and Minnie wanted to read what we had. I didn't know why. And she read what we had. She says, can I send this to my brother? And I said, well, okay. I didn't know anyone in Hollywood named Cudner, but that's where her brother was. So it turns out it was Jay Summers. And Jay Summers was the director,
Green
writer, and
Acres.
producers of Green Acres.
Oh,
And
yeah,
he came back and said, can you create 13 episodes to go with this so I can pitch it? So we went back and we did. We developed 13 episodes. Now, back then, I had no idea or no clue, because I didn't go into this to be a writer, what that meant. So after 6 months, and he was pushing it in Hollywood, and, you know, it was finally rejected because of the only having 3 networks. Someone had started developing Hotel. And my idea behind this was very similar to Hotel, because it centered around a room service captain as opposed to a concierge. And so anyway, it got scrapped. But I still had no idea how golden that was. So it took me until 1995 when my first idea for a novel, or first novel actually was published, that I realized, hey, I can write.
Right.
Maybe I can do this for a living.
And what's the novel called? Or?
The Emblem was the first novel that was
And
published.
what is it about?
It was government espionage about a retired Air Force colonel who was inducted to the CIA, or
Recruited?
Yeah, recruited. And then he met a young man when he was on a covert operation in South America named Zace, who was an orphan child growing up. He learned his story. He had a daughter. He had something in mind, like, I'll introduce this kid to my daughter. He's the perfect fit for her.
Right.
She was jealous of him because her dad always talked about him, but she had never met him. But then when she met him, they fell in love.
Okay.
So then something happens when a terrorist group, when he was on a covert operation in the Middle East, he discovers the plans for a military base, photographs it, and inside is this medallion. And it has these ornate emblems on it. And so he photographs it, having no idea that it had something to do with that military base. So during the course of getting his soon-to-be son-in-law to meet his daughter, something happens. I'm not going to give it all away. I want people to buy the book.
Right.
And there's a terrorist attack in the United States. This is way before, by the way, before
Wow.
we had,
Yeah.
9/11.
95, 6
Absolutely.
years before, yeah.
So anyway, from that point forward, the book takes place. The story takes place where they're trying. This government organization has infiltrated our government, and they realize he has this medallion that he had duplicated from memory, and they think he knows what he has, but he has no clue. He thinks it's just an ornate medallion that he had duplicated because he's into that. And so everything ensues to where now this government's trying to kill him and blowing up stuff. Anyway.
So that emblem becomes a MacGuffin.
Yes. It's a very important part of the story because it actually incited an entire government in the Middle East that came after us.
So how do you write?
Now,
What's your
how did you get that whole book together?
I dreamed that one.
Oh,
that whole
I mean,
story
how explicit was the dream? I mean,
well, the dream only involved 3 characters,
Right.
the 3 main characters, and then as I started writing, you can't just have 3 characters in a novel.
Yeah.
So then from there it expanded to all the other characters that are there. That's what I love about the creative process. You can a lot of my work is based on dreams. So I'll wake up in the morning at 4 and I'll write down what I dreamed or dreamt, and then from there I'll start creating.
What's your best time during the day for creating for you?
Early in the morning.
Early in the morning. That seems to be the reoccurring theme for a lot of people.
I think because we get up after having slept and
you're fresh.
Yeah, you're fresh
Yeah.
and the ideas are there, and that's But I love the creative process because when you're creating characters, like in that story, in that specific story, Zace and his girlfriend Nikki were going. He was going to propose to her, and they were going to Savannah, Georgia, but he's going through training through the Secret Service, and his partner for that was not married, and then. Yet he was going with him to Savannah. I'm thinking this is kind of not going to make sense. He wouldn't have this guy go with him. So I had to marry him. So I had his wife, Molly, enter the picture. So now I had to go back and recreate parts of the story and add her in. And now she became an intricate part of the story. Molly did. So it's interesting how when you're creating, how something that didn't even exist when you first created the story can now become an important part of the story.
So you create the main character first, and then you allow the other characters to come into the same world.
Exactly.
And they interact, and there's discovery. And
Right. I had to create a character for Colonel Warren, who was the main character, who something happens to him. They think he could be dead or he could be alive, and I'll leave it at that. And that's where Zace, after something happens to Nikki and the Colonel, now is on a mission to find out why and what happened to them. He's pretty certain one character's dead, but he's uncertain of the other because of the type of explosive that was used in blowing up his house. He could have disintegrated, and no remains found, but he doesn't think so. So that's where the whole thing takes off on a find out who's responsible and why. And anyway, so we had to introduce a character, Colonel Warren's secretary, because she became an important part because she ends up having possession of that medallion. And then she passes it off to someone else. And there's a whole mystery behind that.
Kind of like a Hitchcock.
It's kind of like a Hitchcock.
Yeah. Where can we find this book?
It's available on Amazon.com.
Okay.
Yeah. It's called The Emblem.
The Emblem by James Kelly.
My very first novel.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was written into a script as well. And there's many stories behind how it almost produced.
That'll be another podcast.
That would be another
podcast.
episode.
But it literally was almost made to a movie 4 different times. I think
That's
back,
painful.
and even though it's been that many years, what is that? 15
Since
years?
95? Yeah.
16 years. I still think it could still make a great movie.
It's 26 years.
Oh, yeah, 26 years. I still think it can make a great movie.
Projects don't die. I mean, if they're there, they're waiting to be like fruit. They're waiting to be picked.
Yeah.
And even, we have one project that it's been, 30 years now for this
Close to it.
our movie that Peter wrote called Pumping Up. And
it keeps going.
it just keeps
gets
going.
picked up, and then
it goes, then it keeps
it gets
getting
legs, and then gets legs, and
How do you handle rejection?
Not well. No, I used to not handle it very well. You take things personally, but as someone who's been writing for a while now, and also dealing with other authors, because I publish other authors as well, I've learned that you have to accept criticism and rejection. It's just part of the process. And if you let it get to you and get under your skin, then you're not going to ever succeed.
then you're in the wrong business.
Even in radio, because I do radio as well, and I have my own show. I used to take
Which is called?
The aspects of writing is one. The Next Big Star is another.
Okay.
But anyway,
on this network.
with those shows, specifically with aspects of writing, I sometimes get criticism because of either the guest I'm interviewing, the type of interview, or a question that was asked. And, I have my reason for asking certain questions, just like you do on your show. And oftentimes I'm thinking, they don't even know why I asked that question, really.
And you get criticized for asking specific questions.
And I used to take it personally. But keep in mind, you'll get one or two.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Yes. I had a gentleman on whose story was really unique in that he was he was stolen from a hospital in Chicago when he was a baby, supposedly, and reappeared at a shopping mall in New Jersey 2 years later, okay? And he was given back to his parents. The FBI determined he was the child that was missing. Right. Because when he was born, there were no fingerprints or footprinting when you're immediately born, right. And they hadn't gotten around to it yet before he left the hospital. So when this lady stole him out of the hospital, the only thing they had was pictures, and by his earlobe, supposedly they're unique, so the FBI determined that he had to be that missing child based on his earlobe. So the parents raise him as their own child for 50 years, and he does a DNA, only to find out that wasn't his real parents. Well, his daughter was on the show with him, and she was 9 at the time, Emma. And I thought to myself, I'm hearing all this story, and I wonder what's going through her mind. What is she thinking about her? Because she had to live through this with her father and finding out who he was, his real family and all that. And she'd gone through all this with him. And The Foundling, by the way, is the name of that book, and it's a great book. It's a true story. But I got around to asking Emma, is there anything you want to ask your father? And toward the end of the show, she was very shy. But toward the end of the show, she finally turned to him and said, Dad, are you my real father? And, it caught him off guard. But then he laughed and he said, of course I am. But you have to realize that in her mind, that had to be weighing on her mind. Like, he didn't know, and it turned out his real father. So it's just a natural question a child would. Yeah. I think I actually did a service there by him conveying to her, yes, I'm your father. Your mother and I were there when you were born. We never left your side. And I thought that was a great service. But I got criticism saying, how could you ask this of this child, was one. Another one was, why would you have that child on with her father on such a story like this? But they didn't understand that she's had to live this every day with him and going through this whole process. But, but you still take it personally, even though But I'm learning to tune that out. I had one guy on a religious show I was doing. It was a book on my author's series. And it was a religious book, so I have to talk about it because that's what the book's about. Yeah. And I had someone come in and say, I thought this was supposed to be a non-political, non-religious book. Yeah, but the book is about this. I have to ask these questions, And he called back 4 times.
Oh, my God. So what advice would you have for new writers? Because I know you do teach writing.
Yes. Well, the biggest advice I would have, don't let anyone stop you. Oftentimes people say, I don't think I can do this. I don't have a journalistic background. I just don't know how to go through the whole process. I always recommend, one, if you can write the first sentence, the rest of it will be easy. It really will. You just have to write something down.
It's the start.
It's the start. And then if you're uncertain, take classes or hook up with a writer's group. Find some way to help that motivational process.
I know you teach. Where can someone contact you?
Well, at Quirky Minds Media, they can go to quirkymindsmedia.com, or actually Shared Space to Create is another, sharedspacetocreate.com is another place you can go to learn about our classes, or All Aspects Radio Network. They're all connected, so you can go to any of those.
Self-publishing.
I wrote a book called A Simple Guide to Writing and Publishing. And it really is a simple guide. We overthink things way too much. And not just as authors, but even as script writers. We can often talk ourselves out of things. And this guide actually, and you can get that on Amazon.com as well, that guide will actually make it simple for you. Uncomplicate is what I call it. Dumb it down so that you can put it in writing and get to a certain point to where at least you're now learning about the process.
Exactly.
It's really not that difficult to self-publish.
Frustration. People go through a lot of frustration.
Now it's a lot more accepted, too.
It is. It
doesn't have a stigma around it.
How long? How many years ago was it a stigma?
Well, my first book came out in 95, and nobody was self-publishing.
Nobody was.
Nobody.
And I was.
Yeah.
And that actually launched what I'm doing now, because Stephen J. Cannell, who wrote 21 Jump Street, Hill Street Blues.
Baba Black Sheep.
Baba Black Sheep. He had 42 shows on television.
I know he did, yeah.
And he wasn't known as an author. So I met him, I think, when he had a second novel come out.
You know, he also had very bad dyslexia.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he actually mentored me one day on what I needed to do to go out there as a self-published author, because he said, James, find what it is that's unusual that people want to come to a lecture. Do a lecture before the book signing. Because he said, even though I'm well known on television, I'm not known as an author, so I have to do a lecture to bring people in. And his was, of course, on writing for television, but then they'd still buy his book because they wanted. And so for me, it was self-publishing because nobody was self-publishing back then.
So what about marketing, book signings? Do you think book signings work now, or do you think that everything should be online?
You have to do it all.
Got to do it all.
You have to do it all. Don't get your hopes up when it comes to a book signing. The average author will sell between 7 and 12 books at one sitting. If you're doing 20 or more, you're doing very well as a self-published author because people don't know you. You know, so getting out there and getting yourself known is important. Having a platform like mine became radio, and lectures. Lectures is what really got me going. Aspects of Writing was the lecture that I used to do back in 1996, and it morphed into a radio show.
Oh, okay.
So, and actually a publishing company at one point.
Right, right.
So you never know where it's going to, but you do have to be out there, and you do need to be pushing the projects. And radio's a great way of doing it.
Do you ever get stuck when you're writing, or?
Oh, absolutely. What do you call it when you can't think of one? You can't work on one thing at one time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm constantly working on this project, this project, this project. And Peter, you know that.
Yeah.
So, because we do work together on other things. And I'm all over the
we
place.
need to stay focused.
Yeah, stay focused.
Let's talk about this right now.
But I can't. I have to be constantly working on one project or another. I also studied art, and I was in art class when I was in high school. And I had an art instructor. I remember my first year in high school, I started this one painting, and you're supposed to finish it to get a grade. But I got bored with this one painting, so I did do something in a hurry to finish just to appease the art instructor. Gave me a C. And by my senior year, he's going, are you ever going to finish that one painting? Because you started it 2 years ago, and then you went and picked it up again last year, and you didn't turn it in. And I go, I promise you I'll finish it this year. And I finally did. So it took me 3 years to do this one painting just to appease my art instructor.
I was going to ask you, how long does it take you to write a book?
A book is different. I've
Yes.
written, a children's story one time I wrote in 1 hour.
Wow.
But other novels have taken 3 or 4 or 5 years. And as far as pushing the project, it can take, I know you've heard of Fried Green Tomatoes, the movie.
Yes, yeah.
You know, Fannie Flagg, she wrote the book. It took 20 years to get it made into a movie.
Yeah.
Well, that's where I am. You know, I still have projects that I'm pushing from 20, 25 years ago.
Talk about your movie projects.
Okay, because you guys are going to be involved in one. We have one called Finding Happiness, and it's about a group of seniors, but it starts off with 2 people who are retired and on the road. They decide to get an RV and travel after retirement. And I don't know how much you want me to go into that one. I don't want to go into it too much.
Well, just say a few, a few
Give us a
thoughts
little
about
Basically,
it.
they're
A TV guide
bickering.
blurb.
They're bickering all the time, and they come across this one place they're traveling, and they end up in this one place where they have a flat tire and need help. And there's this Indian priestess. They end up on an Indian reservation, don't know it. But anyway, they stumble upon this Indian priestess, and they are on the porch, and the grandson of this Indian priestess opens the door, and she comes out, and George is there, and George is there, and he says, my name George, she Mary. And the woman says, I know who you are, George. You know, it's like she's not that kind of Indian.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
she's in modern day George.
Yeah.
So, and she says that, you know, I know why you're here. You had a flat tire. You need her help. And then she turns to Mary, and she takes this necklace off as she's approaching Mary to put it around Mary's neck. And she says, and I know why Mary's here. And George says, well, yeah, of course you do. She's here for the same reason I am. She says, no, George. Mary's here to find happiness.
Mm.
And then from that point on, it takes off to where Mary starts working on her own movie script. And George comes in one day from playing golf. He's one of those who, he's not a tech person, doesn't know how to operate anything, and barely opens the refrigerator door. And so then he wants his lunch ready, and she's so busy typing, and she's eating a sandwich as she's typing. And he's moaning and groaning about it. And without thinking, she just grabs hold of the necklace and says, George, it'd make me so happy if you just shut up and fix your own lunch. So behind her, she doesn't see what he's doing. but he's fighting himself, but he's having to get his lunch ready, But she don't see any of this. So a couple weeks goes by, and he's thinking, I don't know what the heck happened there. But he comes in, again, he wants his lunch ready, and she's busy working on the computer. And this time she turns around, but just out of habit, grabs a necklace and says, Georgia, it made me so happy if you'd just shut up and fix your own lunch. And she's sitting there watching him, and he's almost crying as he goes to the refrigerator, and she's watching him. He's opening the refrigerator, and he pulls out a jar of mayonnaise and a jar of pickle chips and puts them on the counter. And she's thinking he hates pickles and mayonnaise. And then he pulls out a loaf of bread, and he's crying as he's practically crying as he's making this sandwich. And she's watching him in disbelief. And he goes and he's cringing as he bites into the sandwich, and she's watching him eat it, and she goes, George, you hate pickles and you hate mayonnaise. What are you doing? I don't know. And so then
he's like possessed.
Possessed.
Yeah.
So you like comedy.
I like comedy.
You like to write comedy.
And then she discovers she has the power in the necklace. And then from there it takes off. And then the movie gets made that she wrote, by the way, but it's a flop. Right. But she says it's going to make me so happy when it's successful, and the whole thing after that.
So you have Quirky Minds Media.
Uh-huh.
How did you start that in Vegas here?
Well, I had a couple people who were going to come on board to help me with my projects. It didn't work out the way I thought. We were sitting around one day, and we're trying to figure out a name, and we probably went through 40 names, and all the URLs were taken. And you need to have a URL that's going to match. And I'm sitting there and go, we're all so quirky. We have such quirky minds. And I go, that's it, Quirky Minds. And they go, that's right, that'll work.
Quirky Minds Media.
Quirky Minds Media.
And it stuck. And plus the URL was available.
Right. Anyway, we need to wrap the show.
Yep.
Sorry, I talked my ear off.
No.
Your ear off.
Mention your website again.
AllAspectsRadioNetwork.com, QuirkyMindsMedia.com, and SharedSpace2Create.com.
Yay.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you, James, for being on
Thank you, James.
Creative Podcast.
The creative process continues.
Yes, and you're part of that creative process here at the studio.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
And it continues and continues and continues. Thank you, everyone.
See you next time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.